We live in a world that's just obsessed with leadership hacks and corporate strategy. But what if the most powerful job description for a leader was actually written almost 2,000 years ago? Today, we're going to unpack one of the earliest blueprints for what it means to have influence, found in the ancient text of 1 Timothy, chapter 3. And we're going to discover what it says about a leader's character.
Right away, the text flips the script on leadership. Before it even lists a single qualification, it calls the aspiration itself a noble task. And that's a pretty radical idea, right? It's not about climbing a ladder or gaining status. It's about desiring a beautiful, worthy responsibility. This really sets the stage for a profile that's built on character, not just ambition.
Okay, so if aspiring to lead is a good thing, where do you go from there? What does this ancient job description actually demand? Well, we're about to see that the qualifications really fall into 3 critical arenas: a leader's inner character, their home life, and of course, their public reputation.
All right, first things first. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty qualifications, we've got to understand the job title itself. What did it actually mean to be an overseer in this early community? So the word they used back then in the original Greek was episkopos, and it literally just means overseer. We might hear the word bishop today and think of something different, but its original meaning was much closer to a congregational manager, someone responsible for both the practical and the spiritual well-being of the whole community. Basically, what we'd call a pastor today. Okay, so now we get to the real heart of the profile. And what's so striking is where this whole list begins. It's not with skills or experience or charisma. Nope. The absolute first requirement is something much, much deeper: the leader's inner life and their personal character. This ancient blueprint for leadership is, well, it's kind of obsessed with balance. On one side, you have all these positive virtues: being temperate, self-controlled, respectable. These aren't exactly flashy headline-grabbing qualities. They're all about stability. And then on the other side, you see the big disqualifiers: a love of money, a quick temper, a quarrelsome nature. The message is crystal clear. Before you can lead anybody else, you have to be able to lead yourself.
Now here's a phrase that gets debated a ton: husband of one wife. But when you dig into the original Greek, it literally translates to a one-woman man. So most scholars will tell you the emphasis isn't really on a person's marital history like if they were divorced. It's all about their present reality: a deep, visible, and unwavering commitment to their spouse. It's a test of loyalty in their most intimate relationship.
And that focus on marriage, it leads us right into the next critical area. The text basically argues that before you can even think about leading the church family, you first have to prove you can lead your own family. The home was the ultimate proving ground.
Look, the logic here was really simple and direct. A person's own household was their first congregation. How they managed their relationships, their kids, their responsibilities at home, that was considered the #1 predictor of how they would care for the wider community. I mean, if your own home is in chaos, how can you be trusted to bring order and wisdom to the church?
As one scholar, Dr. Robert Yarbrough, puts it perfectly, the family is a microcosm of the church. This wasn't just a nice suggestion. It was a non-negotiable. The integrity of a leader's private life had to mirror the integrity they hoped to build in their public role.
All right, but a leader's life isn't just lived at home, right? It's not all behind closed doors. So after establishing character and home life, the profile moves outward to that third critical arena: a leader's public skills and their reputation out in the wider community.
And you see 3 key things that really stand out here. First, they had to be able to teach. And think about it. That also means they had to be a constant learner, right? You can't pour from an empty cup. Second, their reputation with people outside the church mattered a lot. They had to be seen as credible even by non-believers. And finally, they couldn't be a new convert. Why? Because the pressure and the attention could easily lead to pride and a quick flameout. Maturity was absolutely essential.
But this high-character overseer wasn't ever expected to be a one-person show. Not at all. Because right away, the text introduces this whole support structure, these vital roles like deacons and the leader's own spouses, making it clear that effective leadership was always, always a team effort.
And when you put them side by side like this, it's really revealing. I mean, just look at the similarities. The standards for character and for managing your family are identical for both roles. The big difference is in their primary function. The overseer was the teacher and the strategist, while the deacon was the doer, the one focused on that hands-on, practical service. This whole structure was designed to protect the overseer's time so they could focus on prayer and teaching.
To really get the vital role a spouse played, there's this incredible story.
Pastor R. Kent Hughes was so discouraged at one point, he was literally ready to quit the ministry. And his wife, Barbara, looked at him and said, "I have enough faith for both of us." Wow, that single statement just perfectly captures the kind of deep, encouraging partnership that was seen as the bedrock of a sustainable ministry.
Okay, so we've got this really demanding list of qualifications. It's a high bar, but what's the why behind it all? What's the ultimate motivation for these high standards? Well, the text doesn't just leave us with a list of rules. It anchors everything in a profound belief it calls the mystery of godliness.
And this is where we see that this whole list, it isn't just some behavioral checklist for a job interview. These character traits weren't the goal in and of themselves. Instead, they were meant to be the natural outflow, the result of a leader who was just completely captivated by a central, powerful truth. And this is that core mystery. It's actually believed to be an early Christian hymn. It's this incredible 6-line creed that summarizes Christ's entire story, from his appearance in the flesh all the way to his ascension into glory. That belief, that was the engine. All those character traits we've been talking about were simply the expected response to this incredible truth.
So what do we do with this ancient profile today? In a world that so often prizes charisma over character and a polished public image over private integrity, how does this blueprint, a blueprint built on humility, on service, and on a well-managed inner life, how does it challenge our own ideas of what it truly means to lead?